Good morning. My name is Chris Adlam with Youth Pledge for Employers, and I'm delighted to be joined by William, the owner of Maple Farm Kelsale. Good morning, William.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for giving up your valuable time to speak to me this morning. And I guess my sort of start off a 10 question, as a start of our conversation is, can you tell me a little bit about Maple Farm Kelsale and what it does?
So Maple Farm Kelsale is a small family-owned organic farm. So we farm organically, which means we try and use the sort of natural processes of the soil and plant life, and we don't use lots of chemical or any chemical inputs. We have a certain amount of livestock, which is common with organic farms, mainly hens, laying hens. So we produce a lot of eggs. We grow cereals. We grow sort of unusual old cereals. We have our own flour mill, so we mill the cereals into flour, which is very unusual on farms these days.
Wow.
We have a shop. We have our own farm shop, and so we sell produce. We have a market garden, so we produce a lot of different vegetables in season and fruit. We have bees. We produce apple juice. As I say, everything gets sold through the shop. We have a few too many eggs, so we sell those in shops nearby. And we have a wonderful sort of cafe mini restaurant on the farm as well, which again is pretty unusual for a modern farm. And it's called Pinch, and that uses the produce from the farm as well.
That's really interesting. So I've got two questions based off that. I say I don't have an agricultural background. So the first one is sort of, you talk about it being an organic farm. So is that a bit of a niche and a novelty within the agricultural sector, or is it something that's on the increase? I'll let you answer that before I get to my second question.
Yeah, okay. Well, no, it's a really good question. And our organic farms, they're certainly not a niche, but they're a minority of farms are organic. We've been farming chemically, let's call it, really for nearly 100 years. So, my grandfather probably was the first to farm very chemically, which was buying in lots of inputs. And there's more and more research showing that it is actually very bad for the soil, pretty bad for us. And actually very expensive for the planet as well. So there's a growing interest in farming in a different way. Organically is quite difficult, and you will hear in farming conversations people talking about farming regeneratively, and that means that they're trying to regenerate the soil. The soil is so important in what we do, and it's where everything comes from. It's where most life is. So there is a real growth in people trying to farm in a sustainable way, in a way that is healthier for us and for the environment. And it's a very interesting time for farming. And there are a lot of farmers, perhaps older farmers, who find it rather terrifying. But actually, it's a very exciting time, I think, for young people who want to join an industry that's sort of at a crossroads, because new skills are going to be needed. If we farmed chemically before, we're perhaps farming biologically now. So you're going to need to be out and about, just like all farmers used to be in the countryside, but with strong training and strong skills, and actually learning stuff that perhaps hasn't been learned before. So I think it's a very exciting time to be doing this particular type of farming. You're going to ask the second.
I am, as I say, we'll go on to talk broadly about the sector and the kind of skills required for all the new developments that come up in a minute. But I just wanted to go back, because you talked about all the various different things you do on Maple Farm Kelsale. As you say, from the shop to the beekeeping to, as I say, to eggs. What kind of sort of different roles are there to actually facilitate all of the different parts of the farm?
So, I mean, farms always used to be mixed, and what I described to you is a mixed farm. A good farmer didn't put all their eggs in one basket, and that phrase comes from farming, like most phrases do. Farming has become very specialized in modern times, and we are sort of going in, I suppose, the opposite direction. So the sort of skills, the sort of people, the sort of jobs that need to be done are very varied, and you won't have one person only doing one thing. I mean, it suits people who enjoy variety in their day, and it does require people who find that stimulating and relatively easy. So every day, well, nearly every day will be different.
So if we dig down specifically into the role, so let's say I've never worked on a farm. So what kind of, in my head, I can imagine you've got sort of I'm just thinking you've got farm managers and those kind of things, but sort of like if we take Maple Farm, Kelsale, exactly, like who's
Yes.
looking after the sort of the shop, if you see what I mean? Who's looking after the livestock? So what kind of actual different labelled roles are there?
Well, so we, as you say, we have a farm manager who's responsible for everything, but in the shop we'll have shop assistants. I mean, some of the time the shop actually looks after itself because we use modern technology and we have people coming in, but it always needs to be stocked. And so we have growers, we have a sort of senior grower and then assistant growers who run the market garden, but their job will also be to take the produce and put it into some sort of packaging if we need to. We try and avoid that, to put it into the shop. So they will have to be helping in the shop, helping with stock control. So even that is quite varied. They'll be taking orders from outside. Sometimes we have, gluts, and so we want to sell to local restaurants and that sort of thing. So they'll be dealing with local restaurants. We then have our hens, and so we have somebody or actually several people who will be responsible for feeding them, checking them each day, collecting the eggs. And then, there's just the general management of the countryside. More and more income for farmers comes from managing perhaps the environment as much as producing food. And so there'll be, in winter, there'll be hedge laying and chainsawing. So, somebody working on the farm will be expected to have some chainsaw skills and also tractor driving. There's a lot of tractor driving, a lot of machine driving. So even though I've described perhaps a more, what people might consider to be a more sort of traditional down on your farm, old McDonald's farm, it's highly mechanized. And so, you need to have very, very good machinery skills, understand some basic engineering over time, tractor maintenance, because you don't want always to be calling people in when there's a problem with a machine. So I hope that gives you an example, plenty of examples of the jobs.
No, it really does. And as I say, sort of for someone who doesn't have that background, like if you ask me to list the roles sort of on a traditional farm, I could have been here till the end of time and I never would have said grower, if you see what I mean. So it's, and that's what Lisa's Employer Talk's all about. It's actually about maybe revealing about those kind of roles sort of within sectors and businesses that maybe you wouldn't have realised were actually there. And I find it really interesting that you were talking about, as I say, sort of the challenges to the sector, the way it's progressing. And if we look forward, as I say, at some of the challenges you've mentioned, and you talked about how it's sort of quite an interesting time for young people to maybe get into the sector, what kind of skills do you think they will need going forward to help them deal with the sort of changes and challenges in the sector?
Well, I think, all farms use machinery. I mean, there's increasing talk of robotics. I mean, not just talk of it. A lot of farms, we don't have robotics at the moment. We're a small farm. They're quite expensive at the moment. But we expect a lot of roles to be taken on by robots of some sort, and some of our neighbours already have them. So understanding and being able to operate machinery, whether it's sitting in a tractor, and tractors these days, even relatively modest ones, have a lot of extra technology, GPS, trying to understand where they are. So having, somebody who enjoys working with machinery, big machinery usually, although with robotics it might get smaller again, but sort of, highly, not just sort of sitting back and listening to the radio type of, driving, that sort of thing. So that, I think that's a sort of big draw for people in that sector. The other thing is, I think, as I said before, I think people who enjoy variety, people who might worry about getting easily bored, you never get bored on a farm because there's always something to do. And even if you think you've got your day mapped out, the sheep get out, or there's a mini crisis, and you've got to go and do that. So it suits people who enjoy that sort of thing, who enjoy days that are perhaps disrupted, who aren't too fussed if their best laid plans don't all work out. Of course, the worst disruption of all is the weather. You're working outside, so you've got a wonderful day planned of doing X, Y, and Z, and then it pours with rain, and so you have to do A, B, C because you can't get on the land in the rain. So that it suits people for that. But I think the newest bit of farming that I have described already is the biology. So it's, for people who perhaps enjoyed a bit of science at school. I mean, this doesn't require you to be a professor of any science, but somebody who enjoys just growing things, perhaps who enjoyed, perhaps helping in their grandparents' garden or whatever, and actually understanding the growing process. Understand if you enjoy watching, I don't know, nature programs, David Attenborough on the telly, the biggest ecosystem. We watch the jungle, we watch the ocean, but the big program he's never made is the soil. But 99.99% of life lives in the soil, or should live in the soil. And the way we've been farming has killed a lot of that life. And so the way we are farming, and the way more and more people are farming, is to try and revive that life, to make the soil living again. And then we know there's plenty of science that the stuff that grows on that soil, or the stuff that eats the plants that grow on that soil, will be nutritious and healthy. So understanding how the soil is working, how it's thriving, so testing it and using new techniques for that will require some new skills. And as I say, you won't necessarily need to be a professor of biology, but it will require sort of perhaps levels of understanding of what's going on that our previous generations in farming haven't had to worry about too much. And I think that's really exciting. I mean, I'm trying to say this in a way, I mean, that may put some people off, but I think it will. There's going to be huge demand for people who are up for that, because there aren't many people in the industry at the moment who are, and perhaps they're a bit old and a bit sort of set in their ways, and they may find it too challenging. So it's going to be very exciting for newcomers.
It leads me quite nicely on to my next question, actually, for what you said there, because as I say, we sort of talked about maybe some of the interest that people want to have, or the practical skills and stuff. If we look at their sort of personality traits, so imagining that, as you say, maybe if there's a day where you've planned your full day out and you planned on good weather, but it starts pouring it down, I imagine that resilience has to be an ever-present character trait. As I say, a hard work ethic, I think, goes without saying so, and more and more emphasis on adaptability. And as you say, sort of willingness to learn based on what you said there about new technologies come in, new techniques. Are there any other sort of characteristics or personality traits a person really needs to work in the sector that maybe I haven't touched on there?
No, I think you've captured them all. I think resilience, but I mean, there's a sort of danger that people think that those that work in farming are having to put up with sort of awful weather and awful conditions and whatever. Actually, a modern farm, I mean, there's not much you can do in the rain, by the way. So the idea that everyone's out there in all weathers is old fashioned. I mean, that's certainly what used to happen in our grandparents' or my grandparents' day, but it's not the case anymore. But yeah, you are outside, you're not in a heated office. So you need to be somebody who enjoys that. And I say most people on the farm, I mean, nobody likes a bitterly cold day, but for every bitterly cold day, there's 2 glorious sunny days where you get to be outside. So people who enjoy perhaps sport, it can be quite physical. It's certainly not repetitive, and I think if people are looking to work in a factory where they're doing pretty much the same thing day in, day out, hour in, hour out, this is the opposite of that. People who enjoy working with animals or livestock or plants, as I say, I mean, I think most people do enjoy working with sort of living things, but the excitement, if you haven't tried it, of growing, planting a seed and seeing it growing. So I think all of those things, the sort of people who work in farming, in my experience, are those who can't believe their luck, because it's exactly what they would do even if they weren't working. And so it's kind of almost a vocation for but it may be a vocation that you don't realize you have until you've tried it. In the past, most people would be growing things in their gardens and always seen their parents doing that, and so they know that that's kind of what they enjoy doing. Whereas for quite a lot of people now, we find quite a lot of people come and work on the farm and they just love it, but they didn't know they were going to love it until they came there. They sort of had an inkling. So it's pretty exciting. And but I think you described the skills, the requirements of the job: versatility, resilience, someone who enjoys variety.
That's really interesting there, and I think how you sort of almost actually link in, as you say, the sort of the opportunity to work on a farm in comparison to other jobs that people might be working, the transferable skills, as you say, someone might be working outdoors in another role and they just know, you know what, I like variety, I like work outdoors. Farming's, you know, a really good option there. Whereas I think there's a lot of people who maybe think that, how do I put it, the only routes into the sector are if you know, if you work on a farm through your family or through friends, or maybe you are, you know, as I say, you sort of, you know, that's the first job you've got. Whereas you said there sort of sounds like there's so many natural crossovers for people to come in from other sectors and other organisations if they enjoy, as you say, variety, working outdoors, learning new skills.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's interesting because farming, perhaps, you know, in the past, and maybe there's still a little bit of it lingering, it had a not great reputation, you know, because everybody used to farm 3-4 generations ago. And there was this sort of sense that, oh, my children have, you know, done well at school, and so they're going to break out of this, what has tended to be paid, perhaps a lower paid role. And so, you know, getting out of farming, getting out of these sort of back-breaking jobs, I think probably is still a bit of a reputation for that in farming. But as a result, you know, the sort of people who come to us, and perhaps because we're an interesting and quite sort of, you know, innovative farm, tend not to come from a farming background. They tend to come from all the other, you know, walks of life that we've described, and they don't have any prejudices, and they absolutely love it. And you know what, I'm not surprised by that, because it does have so many areas of interest and so many, you know, things that people, I think, naturally, I mean, most people like working with animals. Most people enjoy, you know, they might have a pet at home or whatever, so enjoy working with animals. They enjoy, as I say, growing plants from seeds. You know, I defy anyone not to be excited about seeing something they put, you know, a little seed in the ground, and then, you know, a week later it's sprouting up, and then 3 months later it's a giant tomato plant with 100 tomatoes on it. You know, that's I think pretty exciting, and I think, you know, thousands and thousands of people think the same. So yeah, it's much more likely now, I think, that you will come from outside a farming family to want to work on a farm like ours.
You talk about, and it leads quite nicely actually onto my final question, which I'll give in 2 parts. And you talked about there, as you say, about the good days and sort of the parts that get you excited about, you know, the sector. So the question in 2 parts, which is based on your own experience within the sector, what do the good days in the sector look like, and what do the challenging days look like? And the second part to that question is, and I've asked this to all the employers I've spoken to, if you could go back and speak to, say, 17, 18-year-old William, you know, based on the experiences you've had, maybe successes you've had, mistakes you've made, things you've learned, what's the one piece of career advice you would give to your younger self?
Okay, so, you know, a good day in farming is one where the sun shines and you've got a plan to do, you know, a job that needs doing, and everything works, and, you know, the tractor doesn't break down, and the soil is in condition, and so, you know, you get the job done as you wanted it to happen. And the bad days are when it rains and the forecast didn't tell you. I mean, of course, sometimes it's good when it rains because you want some rain, but not when you're planning to do a job that needs dry weather. Yeah. And basically everything gets in your way, and the machinery doesn't work, and you're up against it, and the forecast says it's going to carry on raining, it's going to get wetter and wetter, and, you know, you've got acres and acres of crops to get into the ground, and all you can see is, if you don't get this done today, it's just going to get worse, and you get frustrated because, you know, you're up against it and there's nothing you can do about it. So those are the frustrating days. But I think it creates a sort of philosophical approach in farmers. People, you know, there's nothing you can do about the weather, and you know, the weather can be your friend or your enemy. And so I think it actually teaches you life skills, that stuff happens and you just have to sort of find a way around it. You can't do anything about it. What would I you know, what would I say to myself? I mean, I talk to a lot of young people, and I grew up in a farming family, but I decided to move away from farming, and I think just try stuff out. I was able to try stuff out. I mean, I'm 60 now, and so, you know, ancient. And at the time, it wasn't particularly encouraged. It wasn't, you know, the idea that you move from one job to the next made you look like you were unreliable. That's so different. So not the case now. I think if you do something, do it well, but say, well, actually, I'd really like to try something else to see if I'm good at that. I think, employers encourage that now. I think you develop new skills. So I'm not saying leave your job every 6 months just for the sake of it, because you can actually learn a great deal by moving jobs within the same employment. And so there's a tendency that people are too sort of willing, too ready to sort of jump in employers. But I think try new things, try as much as you can, because that's the way that you develop a wide range of skills. And that's what's going to set you in good stead for the future, because the future is very uncertain, probably more uncertain than it's been in many lifetimes. And actually having a wide range of skills and being versatile and being, willing to try new stuff, I think is going to set you in very good stead for a good career.